plummeted another 130 points. President Hoover has called for calm, and the nation's banks are sure that investments...
As America careened into the Great Depression of the 30s, there was one image of her engraved on the imagination of all foreigners. It was the skyscraper, sign of ambition, index of the power of Manhattan. New York's shifting, rising skyline was like nothing Europe had ever seen. It was a graph of cultural impaction, the condensation of lives, work, hopes and fantasies onto a mere pocket of land brought from the Indians with some beans. There was a reason for skyscrapers, and it grew out of the tight space of Manhattan Island. When land is scarce, you have to multiply the site. You have to squeeze it upwards like toothpaste out of a tube. The Manhattan skyscraper replayed the myth of frontier expansion. Not horizontal expansion with the wagons rolling westward, but vertical expansion. A conquest of the air, a land grab in the sky. As investors used to say, the thing about land is that God's not making any more of it. American ingenuity now solved this problem. Once you had a site, however small, you could send it up in a stack into what had been useless sky. So Manhattan got both area and denser, and even more of a hive of competing fantasies. The rest of the world marveled at how Americans could turn a patch of property into an abstract, universal sign of thrust and power and go-getting. Between 1927 and 1932, New York went skyscraper crazy and produced some of the most exuberant and flat-out original buildings of the 20th century. Their very construction was a romance, and dancers were hired to perform on their bare girders for the avid media. The challenge for architects was to find a decorative style big and eloquent enough to clothe these steel frames. They brought it back from Paris, and it was called Art Deco, in homage to the event that popularized it, the 1925 International Exposition of Decorative Arts. It was modern but sumptuous, very far from the austerity of the Bauhaus that had gone before. Deco translated into wings and sunbursts and lightning bolts, and its armature, the silhouette of the buildings, was changed by the New York zoning laws, the first code of its kind in the world, which obliged architects to step their buildings back as they went up to prevent the avenues of Manhattan from becoming gulfs of shadow. These step-back rules encourage quotation from an ancient South American form, the Mayan step pyramid. Thus, you often had an imagery devoted to the sacrificial cult of the sun, ritual buildings growing up from the urban jungle.
New York has always wanted to have and be everything, I think. New York is a romantic city, it's a theatrical city, it's a flamboyant city, but it's also a very pragmatic business city. Art Deco sort of wrapped it all into one package. Suddenly New York had a building type that could absolutely summarize all the things it cared about most. Drama, theater, power, money, all of those things the great skyscrapers of New York represented. It was a decorative style, it was entertaining, it was using the ideas of modernism but simplifying them and finding in them a kind of entertainment and putting back the romance. Suddenly, with Art Deco, you could have modernism that had beautiful curving lines and streamlined forms and a certain amount of decoration, and it was not stern and Puritan.
You're meant to like Art Deco because it's delicious and not because it's going to do you good.
Precisely. Exactly right.
Is it a hypodermic needle? Is it Buck Rogers' spaceship on the launch pad? No, it is the Chrysler Building, commissioned by the Detroit automotive tycoon Walter P. Chrysler as a paean to the cars that made him rich. It's sheathed in polished metal and decorated with emblems of the auto age, gargoyles that are huge radiator caps, and a frieze of hubcaps like solar discs running around the 30th floor. The triangular windows in the arches of the spire suggest the spokes of a wheel. This was amazingly inventive stuff, however much purists might sniff at it.
It's 65 years since this palace of vertigo and vainglory was finished, 2/3 of a century, and yet the Chrysler Building remains the best example of a building as corporate logo anywhere in America. She just keeps going, this lofty old dowager with her stainless steel dress and her wonderful eagle gargoyles. Walter Chrysler told William Van Allen, the architect, that he wanted the tallest building in the world.
That set off a vertical race. Downtown in Wall Street, construction was already underway at the new Bank of Manhattan. It too had ambitions to be the tallest. Van Allen bluffed his rival into believing the Chrysler would top out at 925 feet. So the Bank of Manhattan finished at 927, and then Van Allen pulled the phallus out of the hat. He'd secretly constructed a 185-foot spire, and now he had it hoisted to the top of the Chrysler in only 90 minutes. Victory was his. With much hoopla, featuring dancers costumed as futuristic machinery doing their routines high in the sky, the Chrysler Building opened to the public on May 27, 1930. Was Andrew Lloyd Webber watching this? Maybe from the womb. Later, William Van Allen went to an architect's ball, looking like Ning the Merciless dressed in his own creation. Other architects turned up too. For the sky, no records could stand for long. Within only a few months, the Chrysler was topped by an even more famous tower only a few blocks away.
We are about to officially open the Empire State Building, the largest and most beautiful office building in the world.
Not everyone liked the style. To some young architects, functionalism was the gospel, and Art Deco seemed trivial, gratuitous.
I looked at them the way I would a fin on a Cadillac. I mean, with revulsion and disgust. I say, imagine decorating these wonderful skeleton buildings that we have. Only good skyscraper's one that isn't finished. The steel was so beautiful that naturally, if you had that steel, why would you dress it up and put meaningless decoration on it? If you had no idea of the subtleties of the Art Deco decorative things that I like now.
When you look at the Empire State now, do you think of it as being one of the genuinely distinguished American buildings?
I certainly don't. It's an ugly building and hasn't much architectural quality, but it has a symbolic quality way, way beyond its requirements. A symbol, and as a symbol goes, you couldn't do anything better. The tallest in town, it was in the middle of the Depression. And it lifted all our hearts mutually to say we can do it still, can't we? How ridiculous all this poverty, what they're talking about, you know. And so it represented something so strong, I can't get it out of my mind. I still go up, should we go up to the top of the Empire State Building? Well, there's nothing up there. But, oh yes, up to the top of the Empire State Building.
But for many Americans, these high celebrations of corporate power were offensive. They preached the virtues of big money to people queuing at soup kitchens in the streets below. They were a master image of inequality. With the crash, the skyscraper became an emblem of doom, like the temple of a sacrificial cult. Hugh Ferris's drawings turn an imagined New York into a city of prismatic tombs, scary, abstract monuments in a social void. The shift in the image of the skyscraper was highlighted in Fritz Lang's film Metropolis, set in an inhuman cityscape, a dystopia created by hostile technology and based on New York. You feel a chilly touch of this sometimes in real architecture as well, as for instance in a New York newspaper building.
The step from the Deco Tower of Joy to the Deco Tomb was taken by Raymond Hood when he came to design the foyer of the Daily News building on 42nd Street in Manhattan. The idea came from the tomb of Napoleon in Paris. But instead of the body of a dead emperor at the center, you have this large blue globe of the world slowly rotating in captivity under the all-seeing eye of the press and by implication its readers, all happening underneath that glittering black firmament up there. My God, what nostalgia. Makes you think of the days when Clark Kent was a boy and the newsrooms of America were full of the likes of Jimmy Cagney wearing their hats while belting on their underwoods.
The ambitions of the Daily News are etched into the very floor of the foyer. This, we see, is the center of the world, with its capital cities in orbit around it, held in the field of the media's scrutiny.
I am prepared, under my constitutional duty, to recommend the measures that a stricken nation in the midst of a stricken world may require. This nation is asking for action, and action now.
After his election in 1932, Franklin Roosevelt set out to save capitalism by instituting a very different form of state intervention, the New Deal, which included massive programs to employ the millions who were out of work. The Works Progress Administration gave employment to struggling writers and artists. It kept painters busy with murals for town halls, railroad stations and post offices, temper democratic, subject the work and aspirations of collective America. This produced quite a lot of idealized kitsch, not unlike the public art of Stalinist Russia in the 1930s, but it also kept quite a few good artists alive.
Before the Depression, American artists were going to the left bank in Paris, and they were having this beautiful sort of hedonistic life, and when the money stopped, they all came back. The Depression was so disastrous that many of them left off their berets and shaved off their beards and became workers in the New Deal. And the work got politicalized. I know in my own case, I was politicalized out of my own poverty. I didn't have a dime. So I was very unhappy. I was very bitter. Nobody wanted my work. And I think when I got on the project I was on for a while, it was like someone had thrown me a lifesaver.
What artists then have that I don't think they've had any time, ancient and present, is that they felt as part of the working class. When the WPA looked upon everybody as unemployed and the others were unemployed, they were free to be what they wanted to be, painters. And what they were is painters who worked, who painted the common life. They were the part of the common life. There was the freedom to share thoughts, to share opinion, share people's financial difficulties, and this was freedom. Freedom to dedicate yourself. Free to say, I'm a painter who's a human being, and my fellow human beings are my subjects. That's freedom.
Corporations, too, encourage public art. New York's Rockefeller Center is full of it, including this early relief of heroic journalists at work by the Japanese-American sculptor Izumori Noguchi on the Associated Press building. One project caused bitter controversy. The Mexican artist Diego Rivera was approached by John D. Rockefeller with a commission to paint a major mural reconciling capital and labor in this time of red scares and the threat of class war. Rivera was the best public artist then at work in either North or South America and a hero to the artistic left in New York. He was a passionate, if eccentric, Trotskyite, and he endowed this temple of capitalism with a design featuring political demos, cops bashing the workers, and a portrait of Lenin. Lenin was the last straw. Rockefeller fired him and had the whole mural demolished. Artists from the left were outraged. Photographers, too, produced their versions of the worker as hero. In particular, Louis Hine. These riggers on the high steel are seen as young angels of risk and skill, icons of American work. The greatest monument to such collective effort bridges Nevada and Arizona, the Hoover Dam, finished in 1935. Nobody from Las Vegas to Phoenix would be able to brush his teeth or water his ecologically impertinent lawn without this government project.
The dam became a rallying symbol for American self-confidence, so bruised and battered by the Great Depression. It asserts the power of technology, and it predicts a limitless reign over the forces of nature. This great concrete wall, 726 feet high, taller than the Pyramid of Cheops, that holds back the Colorado River, the stream that had carved out the Grand Canyon itself. It isn't even fixed to the canyon walls. It sits there, held by the pressure of the water behind it, like a leaf over a drain.
Can you talk about the elegance of something so big? Absolutely, because its forms are so economical. The curve of the dam face, the polygonal towers, mass and lightness together. Enormous design effort was invested in the project. Naturally, sculpture celebrating the work was incorporated into the work. These winged figures of the Republic, for instance, and a monument to the men who were killed during construction to make the desert bloom. But if the Hoover Dam was America's biggest metaphor of will and skill rising above the Depression, there was one story that the Works Progress Administration left largely untold. It was a story of violent racial oppression and of resistance, that of American blacks in the Deep South and their migration to the cities of the North. The job market for farm work, mainly in cotton, was collapsing in the wake of the mechanical harvester. So they voted with their feet, And by the end of the 1930s, more than 1 million African Americans had traveled north to the cities looking for a better America. This was the biggest internal migration in American history. It was left to a 23-year-old painter, Jacob Lawrence, to create a sort of visual ballad, the Migration Series, 60 paintings that narrate his people's exodus to the freedom that they hoped for.
I was a youngster in 1935, I was 18 years of age, and all of this talk was around me. They would hear my mother and her peers, like their mother and their peers had told these stories. And so it just took on. They told it, and through the churches and through the schools and through the libraries. So it just took on this kind of a fascination. Reading in the newspapers about people being attacked along the way by the authorities. So it could be a very brutal kind of a thing. And even the people who had been in the North a while were subject to physical abuse, that kind of thing. So this was, we were right in the heart of it, right in the midst of it. So all of this went toward influencing my series on migration.
Baby, don't you want to go?
It was just very exciting seeing the people move, or imagine that sort of movement from one panel to the next, south, north. And I loved color. We were going through a Great Depression. In order to alleviate the drabness and so on, that my mother put up all these colors and throw rugs, imitated Persian rugs and things like that. And I realized that might have led me to look at a person like Matisse more.
Considering the violence and pathos of his subject matter, prisons, deserted communities, race riots, Lawrence's images are all the more piercing for their lack of bombast. When he painted a lynching, he left out the dangling body, the jeering crowd. There is only bare earth, an empty noose, and the huddled lump of a grieving woman.
I'm heavy loaded, baby. I'm booked. I gotta go.
There is an Egyptian stillness, freeze-like even when you know the subject was in motion, like that crowd surging into the narrow slot between two railroad cars.
The entire series, of course, is a clash where you're dealing with this physical confrontation. Also, the two women, one black and one white at the fountain. It sums up a human experience that we've faced for 400 years. Two women at the fountain, both look the same, only the color of the skin is different. They both have the same shapes, and here they are as two symbol of a separation, how people relate to and see each other. I would like to think that's a universal symbol and not just a symbol within the migration itself.
But the greatest American artist of the 1930s didn't paint collective experience. A solitary, deeply inhibited man, he focused on lonely people in an indifferent world without much social connection. His name, of course, was Edward Hopper. If you live in New York, you see Edward Hopper everywhere, in a man staring out of a window, in the sunlight on a cornice, in the lobby of a third-class hotel. There hasn't been a painter in the 20th century whose work was more associated with the look and feel of a certain kind of America, a basic America that has nothing to do with the rhetoric of patriotism, but goes much deeper. Earlier artists had painted the frontier, but it was Hopper who saw that the frontier had moved inwards and now lay inside the self, so that the American man of action was replaced by the solitary watcher. He was a man of extreme plainness, straightforwardness, and tact of feeling. He was candid, but his candor
always holds a certain mystery. He's a painter that I trust absolutely.
Hopper was convinced that, in his words, American art should be weaned from its French mother. But Europe always meant a great deal to him. He was no cultural isolationist. Hopper wanted to capture what he called all the sweltering, tawdry life of the American small town, the sad desolation of our suburban landscape.
You can get a sense of the nuances of Hopper's imagination from one of his best-known paintings, Early Sunday Morning. It's a frontal view of a row of stumpy brownstones in New York, too early for people to be up or for traffic to be moving. Silence, stillness, and yet there's an air of expectancy. And Hopper pays so much attention to the exact rake of light and shadow across that band of red brick that you feel yourself drawn into the details. Plus, the buildings seem to go on outside the frame. And so, without alerting you, and without telling any kind of a story, he manages to slip a sense of time into his space.
There are walls between Hopper's people, transparent but thick. In Summer in the City, has she put her clothes on after sex, or has he taken his off to get cool in the New York heat? We don't know. We aren't meant to know. Hopper's peculiar mix of voyeurism, putting us in the room, and discretion, not revealing what they've been doing or thinking, is the hook in the painting. The formality of the picture is signalled by the trapezoids of light and shade cast by the slanting sun through the big bare window.
He was, a rather noble, somber, stately, silent fellow. His wife, Jo, she was a wonderful eccentric who was much underrated in the Hopper literature. She was a sophisticated woman, a woman of great character, who kept him alive. He had a wonderful, uninterrupted apprehension of things, which he then put together massively in a Cézanne-like way. He adored Cézanne. And the other great passion was light. He wanted the fall of light everywhere. He watched light. He watched it wherever he could see it, the slanting light, the movie light. So you can imagine Hopper at the movies, looking at the slanting film noir light. The people who still had, in some ways, the deepest sense of what Hopper did and was are cameramen. Cameramen just adore him. That almost objective, stony gaze of his, which projects the picture like a movie.
In New York Movie, painted in 1939, the spectacle on screen is out of view, and what counts is the boredom of the usherette who's seen it 50 times before. She's dreaming dreams, but are they movie dreams? We don't have a clue. Woman in the Sun is like a Renaissance Annunciation. It's his wife Jo, who was 70 by then, facing the sun stark naked with that blinding shaft of light and shadow printed on the floor. And then the figure vanishes. 4 years before he died in 1967, Hopper painted this, Sun in an Empty Room. And that's all it is. But it's like a stage set just after the curtain has gone up, full of anticipation and mystery. There was another artist, though, who, unlike Hopper, portrayed the verve of 1930s America, not its social isolation. He was in jazz, with its racy, optimistic beat. He caught the visual punch of the American street with its signs and life imagined at jazz tempo. In the early 20s, Davis set out to adapt the language of French Cubism to the signs of American life, producing what he sardonically called colonial Cubism. His father was a journalist and cartoonist, and the son would later describe his own role as a cool spectator reporter at an arena of hot events. Accused of aping French painting, he memorably replied, "I am as American as any other American painter. Over here we're racially English American, Irish American, Russian or Jewish American, and artistically we're Rembrandt American and Picasso American, but since we all live here and paint here, we are, first of all, American." Davis delved images from commercial culture before the pop artists were even born. A classic one is Odol, 1924, in which the bent-neck bottle of a mouthwash is presented plain, name brand, slogan and all, as its own icon reflected in a bathroom mirror, the ancestor of Andy Warhol's soup cans. Davis's obsession with jazz syncopation and variations on the melodic figure winds into the great housing mural Swing Landscape, in which familiar Davis signs for bridge, girder, ladder, mast and cable jive and flicker in a matrix of energetic color. In the 1930s, Davis was on the political left. But he was no Stalinist and had little time for the kind of social realism practiced by many in the WPA. In fact, he condemned proletarian imagery as false social content in art. And a big ideological split opened between modernists like Davis and those artists who saw cubism and abstraction as socially irrelevant over the workers' heads.
There was a political split that happened, and the left really got smashed up a bit. And it seems to me that to organize on the basis of feeding people or righting social injustice and all that is very valuable. But to rally people around the idea of modernism, modernity or something is simply silly. I mean, I don't know what kind of a cause that is, to be up to date. I think it ultimately leads to fashion and snobbery, and I'm against it.
But Davis's enemies were not just on his own turf. Many Americans felt that neither he nor Hopper represented the true America, and they looked for images of an altogether different kind, far from the elitist city. Tendency to look away from the harsh realities of urban society and to idealize another America, the America whose honest and earthy citizens had truly staked their claim on the plains of the Midwest.
This vision of an American rural Eden had something in common with all other Edens. It attracted a lot of people, and it didn't exist. It was something that you look back on with the kind of nostalgia that in times of stress gets confused with social history. The Depression devastated life in the country as well as in the cities of America, and though some people did better than others, there were no real areas of exemption. Nevertheless, this idea of Eden in the heartland struck a responsive chord with people who had been so battered and dazed by having the rug suddenly pulled from beneath them. And this found artistic expression in a group that called itself the Regionalists.
Their loudest spokesman was Thomas Hart Benton, who loathed abstraction and New York itself. The Depression fostered a mood of isolationism and xenophobia in America, and Benton, to his own advantage, helped to focus that onto art. He claimed to be leading the charge for good, plain, honest American pictures, not foreign, not elitist, and not cityfied. In fact, Benton began as a modernist under the influence of Cézanne. And then, ironically given his later dislike of abstraction, he came under the spell of an early American abstractionist, Stanton MacDonald Wright. His own abstract paintings reflect Wright's. Benton turned his back on Paris and New York, returning in 1935 to where he'd come from, Kansas City, Missouri. He destroyed most of his early work to get, as he said, all that modernist dirt out of my system. He denounced New York's art world as a veritable Sodom filled with precious fairies who wear women's underclothes. In the heartland, he found an Eden of honest work and muscular wrists. The fullest expression of Benton's desire to be the voice of his people is this room, the lounge for Missouri's local politicians in the Jefferson City Capitol building. These murals are Benton's version of the history of the state, based on the Missouri River winding out of frontier times down to the present, which was the year 1936.
Nowhere else can you get a better sense of the man, his rhetorical energy and his vulgarity, his love of the late Renaissance and his cornball humour, his overweening self-confidence, and the anxiety that seems to be written all over these posturing figures in their buckling space. By the time that Benton was through with it, this wasn't a lounge anymore. As one aggrieved legislator complained, he couldn't sit down and have a game of cards with his cronies, not with Jesse James about to jump off the wall down the back of his neck.
Others disliked Benton's homestead wife wiping her baby's butt, not the right image for the high deliberations of government. But they did like his vernacular and the big cast of characters, Huck Finn and his black friend Jim, Davy Crockett, and even Frankie shooting Johnny in the barroom for doing her wrong. Only a man who hated gays as much as Benton could have produced such a remarkable image of anal rape without apparently knowing it. But his colour is tawdrily emphatic, and he has no sense of surface. Paint is dry stuff for conveying the message. The rhythmical distortion of bone and muscular structure made his human figures weirdly overdeveloped. Here, in parody of Michelangelo and El Greco, are the twisting, bulging, overstressed forms of his mature work, mannerisms which would so influence his pupil, Jackson Pollock.
He did love the people of the Midwest, and he didn't like the idea of the American people having to buy art from another country. He felt very strongly about that. He didn't want to become, a Europhile in the sense of the art world. He wanted to deny and get away from the European influence and have an art that was purely and strongly American, and that it was certainly time for it. I think Daddy was a very physical person. I mean, he celebrated the working man. he thought that watching a welder with the sparks flying and the big mask and everything was one of the most traumatic things you could look at. And it was better to stay in touch with nature, with physical activities, with being able to chop wood, being able to hammer, make something or do something, or it kept you realer. As long as he felt that he was at war with his peers, he felt like he could go out there and just paint, and really show them where they're at.
As Benton got ever nastier about modernism and his cause was backed by conservative journalists, Stuart Davis uttered a protest. "I too think great art will come out of the Middle West," wrote Davis, "but certainly not on the basis of Benton's presumptions. Regional jingoism and racial chauvinism will not have a place in the great art of the future."
Benton became a writer, political writer, calling modern painters communists and their foreigners as communists. I got it all over the place. Every place I went, when I went out to Kansas City, I was the hot abstractionist and goddamn communist to them. Everyone was, they said. That's what regionalism did to the art world. It separated them politically, not artistically.
Then as now, Americans resorted to doses of industrial strength nostalgia for the good old days as a refuge from the conflicted present. One artist specialized in images of hometown apple pie Eden.
Next to the White House itself, this has to be about the most famous dwelling place in America. It didn't have an architect, at least as far as anybody knows, but it sure had a painter. And by posing his dentist and his sister in front of it, he turned it into the only picture by an American artist that would become an icon pretty well as famous as the Mona Lisa itself. American Gothic by Grant Wood.
Wood painted it in 1930. You can't help reading it as the stern Puritan father defending the virtue of his not altogether alluring daughter with a pitchfork. It may be that Wood was slyly poking fun at the narrow-mindedness of the reigning values of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Or it may be that, as hundreds of thousands of Americans have thought, he was praising the enduring bedrock of American morality. Maybe both. The Gothic window makes the home the shrine of virtue. Grant Wood, a closet case if ever there was one, spent his entire life in the state of Iowa. He was Benton's timid alter ego, unwilling to argue about his work or even explain it much. He set up an art commune here outside the town of Stone City. From this base he wrote his manifesto, Revolt Against the City, exhorting students to stay put and feel free to depict what was local. Very occasionally there's a darker side, as here in Death on Ridge Road with its impending crash. The machine is a dangerous intruder in paradise with Walt Disney wheels. But it was real wheels that carried America's burgeoning fantasies about the future. Industry sold Americans on the life to come, and the future intersected with the present in styling.
Practical streamlining brings the modern motor car into step with modern airspeed styling, which has real economy and efficiency.
As far as the public was concerned, the real leaders in the visual arts were not painters, but designers, applying their ideas to machines like the Chrysler Airflow.
The designers, with their naive enthusiasm, made everything look speedy, even if it was actually meant to be screwed down. The ideal American form was a teardrop with fins, and it gave you
toasters and pencil sharpeners that looked as if they were ready to blast off your desk and go out through the front door at 600 miles an hour. They said, "Escape with us to utopia." From vacuum cleaners to cigarette lighters, the 30s saw more weight of marketing message built into everyday household objects than ever before. They advertised themselves. Look at my sleek lines and shiny surfaces. Buy me and you buy into the future. The future and what it promised was much more popular in the 30s than it is now. For designers and their audience, the utopian car offered much more pleasure than grandfather's horse and buggy. The most symbolically loaded of all these vehicles was the Cord 810.
It became a fantasy that I would own one day, and of course this was the Depression years when most of the cars we saw were dilapidated, beat-up old cars. People couldn't afford anything like this, and my parents looked at me, you know, and they patronized, sure, you know, just go to work. It's different looking, but it has that glamorous, romantic feeling. Once in a while I'd see a picture of either Clark Gable, one of the big stars in Hollywood, owned cars like this. And and I just fell in love with this. I mean, this was something to look forward to. And it became a fantasy of mine to own one day.
So I had the feeling that no ordinary person would own a car
exactly.
like this.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
It slips through the air easier. Everything is sloped back, you know, to give it the sleek, fast look. The factory tested them at 100 miles an hour, and they claimed they drove every car 50 miles.
What's the fastest you've driven this one at?
I've gone 70 in this car.
And did it still hang together? Did you feel it had something in reserve?
Yes.
Everything you looked that for?
Well, you felt like it was falling apart. You know, every little bump and every little pebble, you could feel it. You know, no shocks in this, but it's an old car.
Of course.
Yeah.
Launched in 1935, the Cord 810 carried a mass of trend-setting details. The nose, with its wraparound louvers replacing the normal radiator grille. The shield-shaped pop-up headlamps adapted from aircraft landing lights. And those sexy supercharger pipes worthy of Flash Gordon above the wheel casings. Nowhere else did streamlining get such a cosmetic push as in this rolling sculpture. Against the background of impending war in Europe, designers kept transmitting the popular message that a utopian future could lie in the machine age. At the 1939 World's Fair in New York, Americans were able to see, as the motto of the fair promised, tomorrow, now.
I hereby dedicate World's Fair, the New York World's Fair of 1939, and I declare it open to all mankind.
The famous symbols of the fair were the perisphere and the trilon. The perisphere, earthbound, was the world now. The soaring needle of the Trilon suggested free flight into the future. At Flushing Meadow, American industry had turned a site made up of 6 million cubic yards of ash and trash into a consumer's fantasy world. Its most confident prophecy was an exhibit called Futurama, sponsored by General Motors. This was an environmental model, a hymn to the freedom of the road. Within 20 years, Futurama told you, all social tensions would be smoothed away by the hand of mega-planning and engineering, and the car would make you free.
And now we see an enlarged section of 1960s express motorway. Safe distance between cars is maintained by automatic radio control. Curved sides assist the driver in keeping his car within the proper lane under all circumstances. The keynote of this motorway, safety.
Visitors could also watch a film about a happy family discovering the wonders of high tech, including an obedient robot.
Count them on.
A couple of steps down the IQ scale from the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5? Well, that's absolutely correct.
That's the most remarkable thing I've ever seen.
What about the guards that guy'd make on my football team?
This must be rather a trip down memory lane.
I know it, I'm trying to...
The art historian Robert Rosenblum remembers coming here almost every day when he was 12.
The dog's not a friend of mine.
You were last here when? 1939?
1939, precisely. Well, probably for the first time weeks after it opened. And I have to say, this is a doubly extraordinary experience for me because one of the things I did as an 11 going on 12-year-old in the summer of 1939 was to sneak into Billy Rose's Aquacade.
Which was held here?
Right here, where we're standing. But as I remember it was the aqueous version of the Rockettes. It was all very Art Deco rhythms. Used as I was to Radio City Music Hall, the biggest thrill of a child's life in New York would be to see the Rockettes there. This was the outdoor athletic version of that experience. And I sort of wandered around hoping that someday I could see it. And I, by accident, fell into a side door and tiptoed up some mysterious stairs, and lo and behold, found myself looking at what now is just an archaeological site. I can't tell you how much it felt like the way the world would be. The sense was that we were heading into the most glorious future, and it was the machine that was going to take us there. And it just seemed as though things would be getting better and better and better. We were also innocent in New York, or at least in the United States, in 1939. What was going on in Europe was just beside the point. We were living in a kind of isolation chamber. We never realized that the end was coming. As a symbol for me, this is really the end of an era.
1939 was the year that Twister plucked Dorothy out of Kansas and away to the land of Oz. And for a few years it did look as though all Americans might reach the world of tomorrow down the yellow brick road of technology. Before long, though, it was clear that Oz wasn't around the corner. The Second World War would make America the most powerful nation on Earth, but it would also show Americans what terrors the machine could inflict. They would end up much less certain about utopia.
I ask that the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
Visit American Visions at PBS Online and further explore the American experience through art at the address on your screen.